Maya Sinclair was 3 words into asking the billionaire why he wore her dead mother's ring when she watched the color drain from his face and his hand freeze mid-air. In that single moment, she realized she hadn't just asked a question, she had detonated a secret that powerful. People had spent 26 years and multiple murders trying to bury. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Some moments arrive with such terrible clarity that they divide your life into before and after. For Maya Sinclair, that moment came not with thunder or fanfare, but with the soft glint of gold under crystal chandeliers in the dining room of the Rothmore Hotel. She was 26 years old, 3 months behind on her mother's funeral expenses, and about to serve filet mignon to a man who wore her grief on his finger like a trophy. The Rothmore wasn't the kind of place Maya had ever imagined working. It was the kind of establishment where silence itself seemed expensive, where the clink of silverware against bone china played like a symphony, and where men in suits worth more than her annual salary made decisions that moved markets and destroyed lives. She had landed the job through sheer desperation, lying on her application about her experience with fine dining, learning the difference between a fish fork and a salad fork during a brutal 2-week training period that left her feet bleeding and her pride in tatters. It was a Wednesday evening, the kind of night where autumn pretended it might turn into winter. Outside, rain hammered against the floor to ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. Inside, warmth and wealth created their own climate, insulated from the storms that ravaged the world beyond. Maya moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, her black vest pressed to perfection, her white shirt crisp despite the kitchen's inferno heat. She had learned to make herself invisible, to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to smile with her eyes when her heart was screaming. Her mother had died 6 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that arrives quietly and kills quickly, leaving behind nothing but medical bills that multiplied like malignant cells. Elena Sinclair had been a seamstress, a woman whose hands could transform fabric into dreams, who had raised Maya alone after her father disappeared when she was 3. Elena had never complained, never asked for anything, and had faced her death with the same quiet dignity she had faced life. Maya had held her hand in those final moments, watching the light fade from eyes that had always looked at her with such fierce love. The funeral had been small, attended by the elderly women Elena had sewn for, by the neighbors who remembered her kindness, by Maya, who had stood dry-eyed and hollow at the graveside because grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. There were bills to pay, arrangements to make, a life to somehow continue living. She had sold everything of value that Elena had owned, every piece of jewelry, every collectible, every item that might fetch a price. Everything except the ring. The ring had been Elena's one mystery, her single secret. It was a man's ring, heavy and old-fashioned, crafted from yellow gold that had mellowed to a rich, warm patina. The face of the ring bore an engraved crest, an elaborate design of a hawk in flight, wings spread wide, talons extended. Tiny diamonds formed the hawk's eye, and around the band were inscribed words in Latin that Maya had never bothered to translate. Elena had worn it on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her clothes, touching it sometimes when she thought Maya wasn't looking, her expression distant and sad. Maya had asked about it once when she was 12, her curiosity finally overcoming her mother's obvious desire for privacy. Elena had closed her hand around the ring, her knuckles white, and had said only this: "It belonged to someone I loved very much, someone who is gone now. That's all you need to know." The finality in her voice had silenced any further questions. Over the years, Maya had constructed fantasies around it. Perhaps her father hadn't simply abandoned them. Perhaps he had died, and this was Elena's keepsake. Perhaps there had been a great love story, tragic and beautiful, that her mother had chosen to keep locked in her heart. When the funeral director had returned Elena's personal effects, the ring had been there, still on its chain. Maya had put it on her own neck, tucking it beneath her uniform. A talisman of a love she would never understand, a connection to a mother who was now just memory and grief. Table 12 was set for 1. The reservation made under the name Donovan Cross. Maya had heard the name whispered in the kitchen with a mixture of awe and fear. Donovan Cross was a billionaire, a man who had built an empire in commercial real estate, who owned buildings in 12 countries, whose net worth was counted in the billions, with a casual B that made Maya's student loan debt seem like pocket change. He was ruthless, the sous chef had said. He had started with nothing and climbed over anyone who stood in his way. He bought failing businesses, stripped them for parts, and left wreckage in his wake. He was also, according to the breathless hostess, devastatingly handsome. Maya didn't care about handsome. She cared about the 20% tip that a man like Donovan Cross would leave. Money that would go toward the $12,000 she still owed the funeral home, toward the rent that was due in 6 days, toward the crushing weight of simply existing in a world that demanded payment for every breath. When he entered the dining room, a hush fell over the space like a curtain descending. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to broad shoulders and a lean frame. His hair was dark with threads of silver at the temples, swept back from a face that was all angles and authority. But it was his eyes that struck Maya. They were pale gray, almost colorless, and they moved over the room with the cold assessment of a predator evaluating prey. He chose his table without consulting the hostess, moving with the assumption that the world would arrange itself around his desires. And it did. The hostess practically levitated in her eagerness to pull out his chair, to adjust his napkin, to assure him that his server would be with him immediately. That server, Maya realized with a sinking feeling, was her. She approached the table with her practiced smile, her notepad ready, her voice modulated to the perfect pitch of professional courtesy. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Rothmore. My name is Maya, and I'll be taking care of you this evening. Can I start you with something to drink?" Donovan Cross looked up at her, and for a brief moment something flickered in those pale eyes. It wasn't attraction or interest, it was recognition, fleeting and strained, as if he had seen her before in a dream he couldn't quite remember. Then it was gone, replaced by cool indifference. "Scotch," he said. "Macallan 25, neat." His voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that made pronouncements rather than requests. "Of course," Maya replied, her pen already moving across her notepad. "Would you like to hear our specials this evening?" He waved a hand dismissively. "I'll have the filet rare and the lobster tail. No sides." Maya noted his order and retreated, feeling his gaze follow her briefly before he turned his attention to the phone he had extracted from his pocket. In the service station, she poured his scotch with hands that trembled slightly. She told herself it was fatigued, the bone-deep exhaustion of working double shifts, of lying awake at night calculating impossible mathematics, trying to stretch dollars that evaporated like morning dew. When she returned to his table, he was speaking in low tones on his phone, his face impassive as he delivered what sounded like a death sentence to whoever was on the other end. "I don't care about the sob stories, Gerald. The property is 3 months in arrears. Foreclosed. The building goes to auction next week." He ended the call without ceremony and reached for his scotch. That was when Maya saw it, as his hand wrapped around the crystal glass. The light from the chandelier above caught on his right hand, and there on his ring finger was a ring that made her heart stop beating. It was yellow gold, mellowed to a warm patina. On its face was an engraved crest, an elaborate design of a hawk in flight, wings spread wide, talons extended. Even from 3 feet away, Maya could see the tiny diamonds that formed the hawk's eye. It was impossible. It was insane, but there was no mistaking it. The ring on Donovan Cross's finger was identical to the one hanging beneath her uniform, the one her mother had worn on a chain for as long as Maya could remember, the one that represented the only mystery in Elena Sinclair's otherwise transparent life. Maya stood frozen, her professional composure shattering like dropped crystal. Her hand moved unconsciously to her chest, pressing against the shape of the ring beneath her shirt. Blood roared in her ears. The dining room seemed to tilt and spin around her. Donovan Cross looked up, irritation crossing his features. "Is there a problem?" The question broke through her paralysis. Maya's mouth opened and words emerged that she had no conscious intention of speaking. Words that would change everything, that would unlock doors she didn't know existed, that would set in motion events that would shake the foundations of everything Donovan Cross had built. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with emotion she couldn't contain. "Why do you have my dead mother's ring?" The effect of her words was instantaneous and profound. Donovan Cross went absolutely still, his hand freezing midway to his mouth, the scotch forgotten. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath his expensive tan. His eyes, those cold gray eyes, went wide with something Maya couldn't name, shock perhaps, or fear. For a long moment he didn't breathe. The dining room continued around them, oblivious to the earthquake happening at table 12. Silverware clinked, conversations murmured. Somewhere someone laughed. But in the space between Maya and Donovan Cross, the world had stopped turning. "What did you say?" His voice was hoarse, strangled, as if something had wrapped around his throat and was squeezing. Maya found her courage, or perhaps her desperation, and pointed with a trembling finger at his hand. "That ring, on your finger. It's identical to my mother's. She died 6 weeks ago. That ring was the only thing she wouldn't sell, wouldn't explain, wouldn't talk about. And now you're sitting here wearing it like it's nothing." Donovan Cross slowly set down his glass. His hand, Maya noticed with grim satisfaction, was shaking. "That's impossible," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "This ring has been in my family for 3 generations. It was my grandfather's. So was my mother's." Maya shot back, her voice rising despite her best efforts to control it. "She kept it on a chain. She touched it when she was sad. She said it belonged to someone she loved, someone who was gone." Her voice cracked on the last word. "Now I'm wearing it, and you're sitting here with its twin, and I want to know why." Other diners were beginning to notice. The hostess was hovering uncertainly at the periphery of Maya's vision. The manager would be summoned. She would be fired. But in that moment, Maya didn't care. 6 weeks of grief, of struggling, of lying awake wondering how she would survive, of missing her mother with an ache that never diminished, all of it crystallized into this single moment of terrible clarity. Donovan Cross stood up slowly, his considerable height suddenly threatening. His face had gone from pale to flushed, his jaw clenched tight. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "This is neither the time nor the place for whatever game you're playing. I don't know who you are or what you want, but I suggest you bring me my dinner and keep your delusions to yourself." But his eyes told a different story. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had just seen a ghost, who had just watched his carefully constructed world begin to crack and crumble. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip, extracting several $100 bills and throwing them on the table. "I've lost my appetite," he said coldly, but the coldness was a mask, thin and fragile. He moved past Maya, his shoulder brushing hers, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something like fear. "Wait," Maya called after him, her professionalism completely abandoned now. "Please, I need to understand. My mother is dead. This is all I have left of her story." He stopped at the entrance to the dining room, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. Then he turned, and the look he gave her was complex, layered with emotions she couldn't parse. "Meet me," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, noon. The fountain in Prospect Park. Come alone, bring the ring." Then he was gone, leaving Maya standing in the middle of the dining room, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, aware of every eye on her, aware that she had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The manager appeared at her elbow, his face tight with barely controlled fury. "My office," he hissed. "Now." But Maya barely heard him. She was thinking about her mother's dying words, whispered in the hospital room in those final lucid moments. "The ring," Elena had said, her voice thin as paper. "If anyone ever asks about the ring, tell them the hawk always finds its way home." Maya hadn't understood. She had thought it was the morphine, the cancer eating her mother's brain. But now, standing in the wreckage of her composure, touching the ring beneath her uniform, she wondered if Elena had known this moment was coming. If she had been preparing Maya for a truth that was about to shatter everything she thought she knew. The manager's office was a cramped space that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Marcus Chun sat behind his desk with the weary expression of a man who had seen every kind of service disaster and had learned to expect nothing but disappointment from his staff. He was in his 50s, balding, with the permanently hunched shoulders of someone who spent too much time apologizing for other people's mistakes. Maya stood before him, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She knew what was coming. She had violated the cardinal rule of fine dining. Never, under any circumstances, make the customer uncomfortable. She had done worse than that. She had created a scene, drawn attention, caused one of the wealthiest men in the city to flee the restaurant without eating his dinner. "Do you have any idea who that was?" Marcus's voice was quiet, which was somehow more terrible than if he had shouted. "That was Donovan Cross. He owns the building we're in. He owns the company that owns the hotel. He could shut us down with a phone call." Maya said nothing. What could she say? That she had just discovered her dead mother's deepest secret sitting at table 12? That the grief and confusion of the last 6 weeks had finally found a target, an outlet, and she had been powerless to stop the words from pouring out? "I have to let you go," Marcus continued, and there was genuine regret in his voice. He had always been fair to Maya, had even covered for her when she needed time off for Elena's funeral. "I don't have a choice." He left $300 on the table, "which I'm giving to you because technically he paid for a meal he didn't receive, but I can't have you on the floor anymore, I'm sorry." Maya took the bills he extended with numb fingers. $300. It would cover maybe a week of expenses if she was careful. Then what? The job market was brutal. References were everything in this industry, and Marcus would have no choice but to tell the truth if anyone called. She had harassed a customer, created a disturbance, been terminated for cause. She left through the kitchen entrance, ignoring the curious stares of the other servers, the whispered questions. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and reflective, turning the city into a watercolor painting of itself. Maya walked without direction, her feet carrying her through neighborhoods that shifted from wealthy to working class, from bright to shadowy. She found herself at an all-night diner, the kind of place that was the opposite of the Rothmore in every way. Cracked vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that hummed with a sound like trapped insects, coffee that tasted like it had been brewed during the previous administration. She ordered a cup and sat in a corner booth, finally allowing herself to pull the ring from beneath her shirt. It lay in her palm, heavy and warm from her body heat. In the harsh diner light, she could see every detail. The hawk was masterfully crafted, each feather individually etched, the talons curved and sharp. The diamonds that formed its eye caught the light and threw tiny rainbows across the formica table. Around the band, the Latin inscription wound like a secret, Veritas vincet omnia. Maya didn't know Latin, but she pulled out her phone and typed the phrase into a translation app. The answer appeared: "Truth conquers all." Her mother had worn this ring for 26 years. Had treasured it above all her possessions, had refused to sell it even when they were evicted from their apartment, even when the utilities were shut off, even when there was more month than money, and they ate rice and beans for weeks at a time. Why? What truth was worth that kind of sacrifice? Maya opened her phone's browser and typed in Donovan Cross. The results were overwhelming. Thousands of articles, profiles, interviews. She began to read, piecing together the public narrative of his life. He had been born into poverty, the son of a single mother who had worked 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed. His mother had died died when he was 16 and he had dropped out of school working construction, learning the business from the ground up. By 25, he had his first property, a dilapidated apartment building that he renovated and flipped. By 30, he had a small empire. By 40, which was approximately his age now, he was a billionaire. The articles painted him as a self-made man, ruthless but fair, willing to make the hard decisions that others avoided. He had never married, had no children, lived alone in a penthouse that took up the entire top floor of one of his buildings. He was intensely private, rarely gave interviews, and had a reputation for destroying anyone who crossed him. But nowhere in any of the articles was there mention of a family beyond his mother. No father was listed on any bio, no grandparents, no aunts or uncles, no cousins. It was as if Donovan Cross had sprung fully formed from nothing, a man without history or lineage. Maya searched for images of the ring but found nothing. She tried variations: hawk ring, gold family crest, heirloom ring. The internet, usually so full of answers, had none for her. She sat back in the booth, frustration building in her chest like steam in a kettle. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow noon, Prospect Park Fountain. Don't be late. And Miss Sinclair, I will have answers for you. But you may not like what you learn." Maya stared at the message. How did he have her number? Then she remembered the job application, the background check that Rothmore had run. A man like Donovan Cross would have access to anything he wanted. Privacy was an illusion for people like her, a luxury afforded only to those who could buy it. She typed a response, "I'll be there." Then, after a moment's hesitation, "My mother's name was Elena Sinclair. Does that mean anything to you?" The response came immediately. "No, but perhaps it should." Maya spent the night in her tiny studio apartment, kind of place that real estate listings generously called cozy and honest people called a shoebox. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face, pale and drawn in those final weeks. Her body ravaged by cancer, but her spirit somehow intact. Elena had been a beautiful woman once, with dark hair and warm brown eyes, with a laugh that could fill a room. The disease had stolen that beauty, had reduced her to bones and shadows, but it hadn't touched her essential self. She had faced death with grace, had held Maya's hand and told her that she had lived a good life, that she had no regrets. But that had been a lie, hadn't it? The ring proved it. You didn't cling to a piece of jewelry with such desperate intensity unless it represented something profound, something unfinished. Elena had gone to her grave with secrets, and now Maya was left to unravel them alone. At dawn, Maya finally gave up on sleep. She showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater, the most professional clothes she owned outside of her uniform. She made coffee that she couldn't drink, tried to eat toast that tasted like cardboard. She cleaned her apartment, folding the few clothes she owned, washing the dishes that had accumulated in the sink, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spinning in circles. At 11, she couldn't stand waiting anymore. She grabbed her jacket, put the ring back on its chain and tucked it beneath her sweater, and headed out into a morning that was cold and bright. Prospect Park was a 20-minute subway ride, and she spent the journey surrounded by people who seemed to have normal lives, normal problems. A woman argued with her boyfriend about whose turn it was to do laundry. A teenager listened to music so loud Maya could hear the bass through his headphone. An elderly man read a newspaper, his weathered hands steady as he turned the pages. The fountain at Prospect Park was a popular landmark, a grand structure with bronze horses rearing up from the water, their manes frozen in eternal motion. In summer, it would be surrounded by tourists and family, but on this November morning it was nearly deserted. A few joggers passed by, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. A man walked his dog, a golden retriever that bounded through the fallen leaves with joyful abandon. Maya found a bench with a view of the fountain and sat down to wait. She was early, had arrived at 11:45, unable to bear another moment in her apartment. The minutes crawled past. 11:50, 11:55, noon. He appeared exactly on time, walking across the plaza with the same commanding presence he had at the restaurant. He was dressed more casually today in dark jeans and a black wool coat that probably cost more than Maya's car back when she had owned a car. His hands were in his pockets, and he scanned the area with those cold gray eyes before settling on her. He sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a careful foot of space between them. For a long moment, neither spoke. They both stared at the fountain, at the frozen horses, at the water that sparkled in the November sun. Finally, Donovan Cross broke the silence. "Show me the ring." Maya pulled it from beneath her sweater, lifted the chain over her head and held it out. He took it carefully, almost reverently, turning it over in his palm. His face betrayed nothing, but Maya saw the muscle in his jaw clench, saw the way his fingers trembled slightly as they traced the engraved hawk. "Where did your mother get this?" His voice was tight, controlled. She said someone she loved gave it to her, someone who is gone. She wouldn't say more than that. Donovan reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather box. He opened it to reveal his own ring, removed from his finger and nestled in velvet. He placed it next to Elena's ring on his palm. They were identical in every detail. Same weight, same gold, same hawk, same diamonds, same Latin inscription. These rings were made made by a master jeweler in London in 1962, he said, his voice distant, as if he were reciting a story he had heard but never quite believed. There were only 2 ever created. They were commissioned by a man named James Cross for himself and his brother, Thomas Cross. James was my grandfather. Maya's heart began to pound. Thomas Cross. Was he your great-uncle? Donovan's face was grim. No. Thomas Cross was my father. The world tilted. Maya gripped the edge of the bench to steady herself. Your father? But all the articles said your father was unknown. Because I made sure they said that, Donovan replied, his voice hard. Because my father was a man I wanted nothing to do with. Because acknowledging him would mean acknowledging a past I spent my entire life trying to escape. He stood up abruptly, his control fracturing. He began to pace in front of the bench, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. My grandfather James was a good man, he said. He built a small construction company from nothing, employed people from the neighborhood, treated them fairly. He had 2 sons, my father Thomas and my uncle James Jr. They were supposed to inherit the business together, run it as partners. What happened? Maya asked quietly. Thomas happened. Donovan spat the name like poison. My father was charming, charismatic, brilliant. He was also a liar, a thief, and a coward. He embezzled money from the company, blamed my uncle, destroyed his reputation. When my grandfather discovered the truth, he disowned Thomas, cast him out of the family, but not before making him return the ring. Maya's mind raced. But if your grandfather made him return the ring, how did my mother have it? That, Donovan said, turning to face her with an expression of profound anguish, is what I need you to tell me. The 2 rings lay side by side on the bench between them, twin symbols of a mystery that connected their lives across decades, across grief, across the unbridgeable distance between a billionaire and a waitress. Maya looked at the man before her and saw past the armor of wealth and power to something raw and wounded beneath. My mother never mentioned a Thomas Cross, she said. I don't even know if they knew each other, but she treasured this ring. Whatever he was to her, whatever he did, she loved him enough to keep his memory close to her heart until the day she died. Donovan closed his eyes, and for a moment he looked not like a billionaire but like a lost child. If your mother loved my father, then she knew a version of him I never did. The man I knew abandoned us when I was 10 years old, left my mother with nothing but debts and broken promises. She worked herself to death trying to give me a better life. He opened his eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. So you'll forgive me if I don't celebrate this discovery. You may have found a romantic mystery. I've found proof that my father destroyed another life before he disappeared from mine. The revelation hung in the cold November air between them like a ghost that refused to be dismissed. Maya stared at Donovan Cross, trying to reconcile the image of the ruthless billionaire with the wounded man standing before her, and finding the task nearly impossible. His confession had stripped away layers of carefully constructed armor, revealing something vulnerable and human beneath. I'm sorry, Maya said finally. The words inadequate but sincere. I can't imagine what it was like growing up without him, watching your mother struggle. Donovan gave a bitter laugh that held no humor. Don't apologize for him. He made his choices. He looked at the rings again, his expression hardening. But I need to know what he was to your mother. I need to know if he destroyed her life too, or if somehow impossibly there was something good in him that I never saw. Maya picked up her mother's ring, holding it up so the sunlight caught the diamonds in the hawk's eye. My mother was 22 when She never married, she never even dated as far as I know. When I asked about my father, she would just say he was gone, that he had loved us but couldn't stay. I always thought he was dead. What was your father's name? Donovan asked sharply. She never told me. Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Used to beg her, especially when I was little, when other kids at school talked about their dads. She would just shake her head and say that some stories were too painful to tell, that I should focus on the love we had, not the love that was lost. Donovan's jaw clenched. When were you born? May 15th, 1999. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. His face went pale. Thomas Cross disappeared in September of 1998. He walked out of our apartment one morning, told my mother he was going to work, and never came back. The police found his car abandoned near the waterfront 3 days later. They investigated, but there was no evidence of foul play, no body, no witnesses. He just vanished. The timeline crashed into Maya like a wave. September 1998. Her mother would have been 8 months pregnant. The implications were staggering, impossible, and yet they made a terrible kind of sense. You think he left your family for mine? Maya said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. You think he abandoned you to be with my mother? I don't know what to think, Donovan said, his voice raw, but the timing is damning. He looked at Maya with an expression that was equal parts pain and accusation. Did your mother have money? Did you live well? Maya almost laughed. We were poor. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where you didn't walk alone after dark. My mother worked as a seamstress, took in alterations, and made wedding dresses for people who couldn't afford designer gowns. We ate a lot of rice and beans. I went to public school and wore secondhand clothes, so he didn't leave us for a better life, Donovan said slowly. He left us for something else. Love, maybe, or the illusion of it. A jogger passed by, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the bench. Maya watched him disappear around a bend and felt a strange envy for his uncomplicated morning, his simple exercise routine, his life that presumably made sense. There has to be more to the story, Maya said, turning back to Donovan. My mother wasn't the kind of person who would break up a family. She had too much integrity. Too much kindness. If she was involved with your father, there must have been circumstances we don't understand. Or perhaps she didn't know he had a family, Donovan countered. Perhaps he lied to her the way he lied to everyone else. The accusation stung. Even though it wasn't directed at Maya personally, she felt a fierce protective instinct rise up in her, a need to defend her mother's memory. My mother was not a fool, and she was not a homewrecker. Whatever happened, whatever the truth is, I refuse to believe she knowingly caused pain to you or your mother. Donovan studied her face, and something in his expression softened slightly. I can see she raised you with the same integrity you're attributing to her. His voice was quieter now, less accusatory. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps there are pieces of this puzzle we haven't found yet. So what do we do? Maya asked. How do we find the truth when both our parents are dead? We start with what we know, Donovan said, his demeanor shifting into something more businesslike, more control. He was more comfortable here, Maya realized, in the realm of problems that could be solved with strategy and resources. We know the rings were made in 1962 in London. We know they were commissioned by my grandfather for himself and his brother. We know Thomas had his ring when he disappeared in 1998 and somehow it ended up with your mother. And we know my mother kept it hidden, Maya added. She wore it on a chain beneath her clothes. She never showed it to anyone, never spoke about it, never tried to sell it even when we desperately needed money. It meant something to her that went beyond its monetary value. Donovan pulled out his phone again. I have resources, he said. Private investigators, researchers, people who specialize in finding information that others want hidden. Let me make some calls. I can have a team on this by this afternoon. Maya felt a flash of unease. This wasn't just a mystery to be solved by hired professionals. This was her mother's life, her history, her heart. I want to be involved, she said firmly. This isn't just your story. It's mine too. Donovan looked surprised, as if it hadn't occurred to him that she would want an active role. Then his expression shifted to something that might have been respect. Fair enough. Do you have any of your mother's possessions? Papers, photographs, journals, anything that might give us a clue? I have some boxes, Maya said. I haven't gone through them yet. After the funeral, I just packed everything up and put it in storage. I couldn't face sorting through her life. That's where we start then, Donovan said, standing up. Where is this storage unit? In Brooklyn. It's about an hour from here. I'll drive, Donovan said, pulling keys from his pocket. Maya blinked. You're coming with me? Now? Unless you have somewhere more important to be, Donovan said with a hint of dark humor. I lost my appetite yesterday, and you lost your job. But say we both have the time. The drive to Brooklyn was surreal. Maya found herself in the passenger seat of a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than she would earn in 5 years. The interior smelled of leather and money, and the ride was so smooth she could barely feel the road beneath them. Donovan drove with the same focused intensity he seemed to bring to everything, navigating traffic with aggressive efficiency. They didn't speak much during the drive. Maya stared out the window at the city sliding past, trying to process the upheaval of the last 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been a waitress with a dead mother and a mountain of debt. Now she was sitting in a billionaire's car, chasing the ghost of a father she had never known, connected to a man who should have been a stranger but who felt increasingly like an unexpected ally. The storage facility was exactly as depressing as Maya remembered. Rows of identical orange doors stretching into fluorescent lit infinity, the air smelling of dust and forgotten things. She led Donovan to Unit 42, fumbling with the padlock, her hands trembling slightly. When the door rolled up, she was confronted with the physical evidence of her mother's life. Cardboard boxes, neatly labeled in Elena's precise handwriting. Kitchen, books, winter clothes, sewing supplies, and in the back corner, separate from the others, 3 boxes marked simply personal. Maya pulled out the first personal box and set it on the concrete floor. Donovan knelt beside her, and together they began to unpack her mother's secrets. There were photographs, faded and curling at the edges. Maya as a baby, as a toddler, at various stages of childhood. Elena young and smiling, her beauty undimmed by poverty or hardship. But there were no photographs of any man, no pictures of Maya's father or of Elena with anyone who might have been a romantic partner. There were letters, bundled in ribbon. Maya's fingers trembled as she untied one bundle and pulled out the first letter. The handwriting was masculine, bold and confident. My dearest Elena, it began, and Maya's heart clenched. She read aloud, her voice shaking. My dearest Elena, every moment away from you is an eternity. I know the circumstances of our situation are impossible. I know what I'm asking of you requires a strength that shouldn't be demanded of anyone, but I swear to you on everything I hold sacred that I will find a way. We will be together. Our child will know a father's love. This I promise you with all that I am. Yours always, Thomas. The letter was dated July 1998, 2 months before Thomas Cross disappeared. Maya looked up at Donovan and saw that his face had gone ashen. He reached for the letter with a hand that shook. He knew, Donovan whispered. He knew about you before you were born. He was planning to leave us for you. Or maybe he was planning something else, Maya said, reaching for another letter. Maybe there's more to this than we understand. The second letter was dated August 1998, just weeks before Thomas's disappearance. Elena, my love, I've made arrangement. The money is hidden where only you can find it, in the place we first said I love you. It's enough to keep you and our daughter safe for years, to give you both the life you deserve. I know you'll argue, Tell me it's too much, that you don't need anything from me but my presence. But please, for once, let me provide for you the way a man should provide for his family. If anything happens to me, if my past catches up with me before I can make things right, promise me you'll use it. Promise me our daughter will never want for anything. The ring is my vow to you. Keep it safe. One day it will prove to her that her father loved her before he ever met her. All my love, Thomas. If anything happens to me, if my past catches up with me." The words hung in the air like a premonition fulfilled. Maya looked at Donovan and saw her own horror reflected in his face. "He thought he was in danger," Maya said. "He wasn't running toward a new life. He was running from something, or someone," Donovan added, his voice tight. "My father didn't just embezzle money from my grandfather's company. He took nearly $500,000. Money that belonged to investors, to workers' pensions, to people who trusted him. When my grandfather discovered the theft, he demanded Thomas's return every penny and turn himself into the authority." Maya's mind raced. "So he took the money, hid it, and planned to use it to start a new life with my mother. But then what? What happened that made him disappear?" "I don't know," Donovan said, "but these letters suggest he knew it was coming. He knew someone was after him." Maya reached into the box and pulled out a newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle. The headline made her blood run cold. "Body found in Hudson River. Identified as missing businessman Thomas Cross." The article was dated November 15, 1998. Maya would have been 6 months old. She read the article with mounting dread, her voice barely above a whisper. "The body of Thomas Cross, missing since September, was discovered by a commercial fishing vessel yesterday morning. Cross, who was wanted for questioning in connection with embezzlement charges, appears to have died of drowning. Police are investigating whether the death was accidental, suicide, or foul play." Cross is survived by his wife, Margaret Cross, and son, Donovan Cross, age 10. Maya looked up at Donovan and saw that tears were streaming silently down his face. The silence in the storage unit was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the sound of Donovan Cross trying to breathe through grief that had ambushed him across 26 years. Maya watched him, this man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a word, reduced to the 10-year-old boy who had lost his father and never had the chance to grieve properly because he had been too busy hating him. "You didn't know," Maya said softly. "You thought he just left. You thought he abandoned you." Donovan wiped his face roughly with the back of his hand, angry at himself for the display of emotion. "My mother told me he was gone. That was all she ever said. Gone. Not dead, not missing, just gone. When I got older and started asking questions, she would shut down completely. She drank herself to death by the time I was 16, and I thought it was because of the shame, because he had destroyed our lives and left her to pick up the pieces. But she knew he was dead," Maya said, understanding dawning. "She must have known, and the police would have notified her when they found the body." Donovan's face hardened. "So she lied to me. For 6 years, she let me believe he had abandoned us when she knew he was dead." "Why would she do that?" "Maybe she was protecting you," Maya offered. "If the police were investigating whether it was foul play, maybe she thought it was safer if you believed he had just left. Maybe she was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Donovan demanded, his grief transmuting into anger, a more familiar and comfortable emotion. "Afraid of whoever killed him?" The words hung between them, stark and terrible. Killed him. Neither had spoken it so directly before, but now it was there, the unspoken suspicion made manifest. Thomas Cross's death had been ruled accidental by the police. But the letter suggested a man who knew he was in danger, who was hiding money, who was making arrangements for the family he would never live to claim. Maya reached back into the box, her hands moving with a desperate need to find more answers. There were more items. A ticket stub from a movie theater, dated August 1998, a dried rose pressed between pages of tissue paper, a small velvet jewelry box empty except for the faint impression where the ring had once rested, and at the bottom of the box, a journal. The journal was leather-bound, the pages filled with Elena's delicate handwriting. Maya opened it with trembling hands, feeling like an intruder into her mother's private thoughts, but needing the truth more than she needed to respect boundaries that death had already violated. The first entry was dated June 1997. "I met someone today," Elena had written. "He came into the shop to have a suit altered, and when he smiled at me, I felt something I've never felt before. His name is Thomas, and he has the saddest eyes I've ever seen. He told me he's trapped in a life that isn't his, that he made mistakes when he was young that he's still paying for. I should walk away. Every instinct tells me this man is trouble, but I can't stop thinking about him." Maya flipped forward, reading entries that chronicled a love affair that had consumed her mother. Thomas was married, that much was clear, but according to Elena's journal, he had been separated from his wife for years, living apart but unable to divorce because of financial complications related to his father's business. He had a son he loved desperately, a boy named Donovan who was brilliant and angry, and who Thomas was terrified of failing. Maya glanced at the man kneeling beside her and saw that he was reading over her shoulder, his face a mask of conflicting emotion. She found an entry from March 1998. After Elena discovered she was pregnant. "I told Thomas about the baby today," he cried. "I've never seen a man cry like that, with such complete abandon, such joy mixed with despair. He said he wants to be a father to this child, to be present in a way he hasn't been able to be for Donovan. He said he's going to make things right, that he's going to get out from under his father's thumb, pay back what he owes, and start fresh. I want to believe him. God help me. I do believe him, but I'm terrified. He talks about his father the way people talk about mob bosses, with fear and respect and something that looks like hatred. Donovan inhaled sharply. My grandfather was not a mob boss. He was a businessman, strict and demanding, but not a criminal. Maya kept reading, finding another entry from August 1998, shortly after the date of the second letter. Something is wrong. Thomas came by last night and he was frightened in a way I've never seen. He kept looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound. He said he did what he had to do, that he took back what should have been his anyway, but that they know now and they're coming for him. He made me promise to keep the ring hidden, to never tell anyone where he got the money he left for me. He said his father has connections, people who solve problems that can't be solved legally. I told him he was being paranoid, but he grabbed my shoulders and looked me in the eyes and said, Elena, my father doesn't forgive betrayal. If anything happens to me, you have to stay invisible. You have to protect our daughter. Don't let her become collateral damage in this family's war. The words struck like a physical blow. Maya felt the pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves into a picture that was far darker than a simple embezzlement case. She looked at Donovan and saw that he had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Your grandfather, Maya said carefully. What happened to him? He died in 2005, Donovan said, his voice hollow. Heart attack. Or at least that's what the death certificate said. By then I was 17, living on my own, working construction during the day and going to night school. I went to the funeral out of obligation, not love. He had paid for my father's burial but made it clear he wanted nothing to do with me. Said I was tainted by my father's sins. But he left you the business, Maya said, remembering the article she had read. That's how you started. You inherited cross construction. Donovan shook his head. He left the business to my uncle, James Jr., but my uncle died 6 months later, also of a heart attack. I was the only remaining heir, so it came to me by default. I was 18 years old, broke, angry, and suddenly in charge of a multi-million-dollar company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. 2 heart attacks in one family within 6 months, Maya said slowly. That seems statistically unlikely. Donovan's eyes met hers, and in them she saw the dawning of a terrible realization. My uncle was 45 and ran marathons. My grandfather was 72, but healthy as an ox. The doctor said it was genetic, a family predisposition to cardiac issues. He paused, his breathing shallow. But my father drowned. If there was a genetic heart condition, why didn't he die of a heart attack? Unless the heart attacks weren't natural, Maya finished. Unless someone was cleaning up loose ends. They stared at each other, the implications spreading like poison through their understanding of the past. If Thomas Cross had been murdered, if his father and brother had also been murdered, then they were dealing not with a family tragedy, but with something calculated and methodical. Someone had systematically eliminated the Crossmen, leaving only Donovan, who had been young enough and disconnected enough to be overlooked. Or maybe not overlooked, Maya said, a new fear creeping into her voice. Maybe you were allowed to survive because you were useful. You built the business into an empire. Whoever did this might have been watching, waiting to see what you would do with what they left you. Donovan stood abruptly, pacing the narrow confines of the storage unit like a caged animal. This is insane. You're talking about a conspiracy, about multiple murders spanning decades. People don't get away with that kind of thing. Rich people do, Maya countered, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. People with connections, with power, with the ability to make problems disappear. Your father said in his letter that your grandfather had connections, people who solve problems. What if those same people decided your grandfather was a problem? What if they decided your uncle was a problem? But why? Donovan demanded. What could possibly be worth killing 3 men over? The money, Maya said. Your father stole $500,000. That's not nothing, but it's also not worth a multi-generational killing spree, unless it wasn't just about the money. Unless there was something else he took, something more valuable. Like what? Donovan asked. Maya rifled through the remaining contents of the box, pulling out document after document, searching for any clue. She found it near the bottom, a single sheet of paper folded into a small square. When she unfolded it, she saw it was a photocopy of an architectural blueprint, dated 1997. The header read, Cross Construction Company, Project Blackstone, Confidential. What's Project Blackstone? Maya asked, holding up the doc. Donovan took it from her, his eyes scanning the page with increasing intensity. I don't know. I've never heard of it. But this blueprint shows a building design for a waterfront property. He pointed to notations in the margins. These specifications are unusual. Reinforced concrete, multiple sublevels, high security access points. This isn't a residential or commercial building. This is something else. A warehouse? Maya suggested. Storage facility? Donovan shook his head. The security measures are too extreme. This looks more like the kind of building you'd use for something you want to keep very, very hidden. He pulled out his phone and took a picture of the blueprint. I can have my people look into this. If Project Blackstone was real, if it was actually built, there will be records. And if your father stole this blueprint, Maya added, then maybe that's what got him killed. Maybe the embezzlement was just the cover story. Maybe the real crime was taking evidence of something illegal. They packed up the remaining items from Elena's box, working in a silence that was heavy with implication. Maya felt as if she were standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into depths she couldn't measure. Her mother had loved a man who was murdered. That man was the father Maya had never known. And now she was standing in a storage unit with that man's son, uncovering what might be evidence of a criminal conspiracy that had shaped both their lives in in ways they were only beginning to understand. As they loaded the boxes into Donovan's car, Maya's phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Miss Sinclair," came a male voice, smooth and urbane. "My name is Richard Ashford. I'm an attorney representing certain parties who are concerned about recent inquiries you and Mr. Cross have been making. I'm calling to offer you some advice. Stop looking into the past. Some doors are better left closed. The families involved have moved on, and dredging up old tragedies serves no one's interests." "Who are you?" Maya demanded, her heart racing. "What parties?" "People with long memories and considerable resources," Ashford replied. "People who would hate to see you or Mr. Cross come to any harm. Consider this a courtesy call. A warning from friends. Walk away while you still can." The line went dead. Maya stood in the parking lot of the storage facility, the phone clutched in her shaking hand, and realized with absolute certainty that they had just moved from investigating a cold case to painting targets on their own backs. Donovan saw the color drain from Maya's face and was beside her in 3 strides. "What happened? Who was that?" Maya's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Someone named Richard Ashford. He told us to stop investigating. He said we should walk away while we still can." She looked up at Donovan, her eyes wide with fear. "How did they know? We've only been looking into this for a few hours. How could anyone possibly know?" Donovan's expression went cold and calculating. The vulnerability he had shown in the storage unit replaced by the armor of the ruthless businessman. "They've been watching. They must have been watching from the moment you confronted me at the restaurant." He pulled out his own phone and began typing rapidly. "I'm calling my head of security. If someone is tracking us, we need to know how and why." While Donovan made his call, pacing away from her with terse, clipped sentences into his phone, Maya tried to control the panic rising in her chest. This was real. The threatening phone call made it real in a way the old letters and newspaper clippings hadn't. Someone out there, someone with resources and reach, wanted them to stop digging into the past, which meant there was something worth hiding, something worth protecting, even after 26 years. Donovan returned, his face grim. My security chief is running a sweep on both our phones and my car. If there are tracking devices, we'll find them. In the meantime, we need to assume we're being monitored. Everything we say, everywhere we go, someone might be listening, so what do we do?" Maya asked. "Do we stop? Do we walk away like they want?" Donovan's jaw set in a hard line. "I've spent my entire adult life building an empire, making myself powerful enough that no one can touch me, that no one can make me feel small or scared or helpless the way I felt when my father disappeared and my mother drowned her grief in vodka." He looked at Maya with an intensity that was almost frightening. "I don't walk away. Not from threats, not from bullies, and not from the truth about what happened to my father. Even if finding that truth gets us killed," Maya asked bluntly. "Especially then," Donovan replied, "because if we die, at least we'll know we died for something real, something that matters." He softened slightly, seeing the fear in her eyes. "But I'm not going to let it come to that. I have resources they don't know about. People I trust. We're going to find out who's behind this, and we're going to expose them before they can do to us what they did to my family." Maya wanted to feel reassured by his confidence, but all she could think about was her mother, alone and frightened, keeping secrets for 26 years because a man she loved had warned her that powerful people would come after her if she spoke. Elena had stayed invisible, had lived in poverty rather than risk using the money Thomas had hidden for her, had taken her secrets to the grave. And what had that caution bought her? A life of struggle and an early death from a cancer that might have been treatable if she had been able to afford better health care. "I'm not hiding," Maya said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "My mother hid her whole life, and it didn't save her. It just made her small and scared. I won't live like that. If someone wants to threaten me, let him. But I'm going to find out who my father was and why he died." Donovan looked at her with something that might have been admiration. "Then we do this together. But we do it smart. No more meeting in public places. No more conversations where anyone can overhear. From now on, we assume we're in a war, and we act accordingly." They drove to Donovan's penthouse in silence, both scanning the streets for any sign they were being followed. The building was a monument to modern architecture, all glass and steel, rising into the sky like a gleaming finger pointing at heaven. The private elevator to the penthouse required both a key card and a biometric scan, and when the doors opened, Maya stepped into a space that looked like something from a magazine spread. The penthouse was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. The furniture was sleek and modern, all clean lines and expensive materials. Everything was in shades of gray and black and white, monochromatic and sterile. It was beautiful in the way a museum was beautiful, impressive but untouched by human warmth. "Welcome to my fortress," Donovan said with a touch of irony. "The building has security protocols that would make the Pentagon jealous. If anyone tries to get up here without authorization, we'll know about it 30 seconds before they arrive." He led her to what he called his office, though it was larger than Maya's entire apartment. One wall was covered in monitors showing security feeds from various locations. Another wall held a massive bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes and what looked like architectural models of buildings. The desk was a slab of black marble that probably weighed more than a car. Donovan sat down at the desk and pulled up the photograph he had taken of the Project Blackstone blueprint on his computer. He magnified different sections, studying the specifications with narrowed eyes. This building was designed to withstand significant force, he murmured almost to himself. The walls are reinforced concrete, 18 inches thick. The sublevels have independent ventilation systems and their own power generators. This isn't just secure, it's designed to function independently if cut off from outside services, like a bunker, Maya suggested, leaning over his shoulder to look at the screen. Or a vault, Donovan said. Somewhere you'd store something extremely valuable or extremely dangerous. He pulled up another window and began typing commands that Maya couldn't follow. I'm accessing the city's building records database. If this structure was actually built, there should be permits, inspections, certificates of occupancy. Isn't that illegal? Maya asked. Hacking into government databases? Donovan gave her a look. We're investigating multiple murders and being threatened by people with the power to make us disappear. I think we're past worrying about misdemeanor computer crimes. Fair point, Maya conceded. She walked to the windows and looked out at the city spread below her. Somewhere down there in that vast sprawl of concrete and steel and humanity was the truth about her father, about Donovan's family, about Project Blackstone. The city held its secrets close, but Maya was determined to pry them loose. Here, Donovan said suddenly, his voice sharp with excitement. I found it. Project Blackstone was built in 1997 at a waterfront property in Red Hook, Brooklyn. The permit was issued to a shell corporation called Maritime Holdings LLC. Construction was completed in early 1998. He clicked through more screens. But here's what's interesting. The building permit shows the structure is a 3-story warehouse for commercial storage, but the blueprint your mother had shows 5 sublevels. Someone built an illegal facility beneath a legitimate warehouse. What's there now? Maya asked, moving back to the desk. Donovan pulled up a satellite image. The building is still standing. It's listed as abandoned, scheduled for demolition next year to make way for luxury condominiums. But according to property records, it's still owned by Maritime Holdings LLC, which is itself owned by a labyrinth of other shell companies. Can you trace who actually owns it? Maya asked. I can try, but it's going to take time. These things are designed to be untraceable. However, he said with a slight smile, I know someone who specializes in following money through corporate mazes. He picked up his phone and made a call. When it was answered, he spoke quickly. Catherine, I need you to run a full corporate trace on a company called Maritime Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware in 1996. I want to know who owns it, who's on the board, and who's been paying the property taxes for the last 26 years. This is priority 1. Call me when you have something. He hung up and turned to Maya. Catherine Chun is the best forensic accountant in the country. If there's a trail to follow, she'll find it. In the meantime, we need to decide our next move. I think we need to go to the building, Maya said. If there's something hidden there, something worth killing for, we need to see it for ourselves. Donovan shook his head. Too dangerous. If they know we're investigating, that's exactly where they'll expect us to go. It's probably under surveillance. Then we go at night, Maya insisted. We go prepared with backup, with cameras to document everything we find. You said yourself you don't walk away from threats. Well, this is me not walking away. Donovan studied her face for a long moment. You're either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both, Maya replied. But my mother spent 26 years being neither, and it didn't save her. It just made her invisible. I'm done being invisible. Before Donovan could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. It's Catherine. That was way too fast. He answered on speaker. Catherine, what did you find? Mr. Cross, came a woman's nervous voice. I'm calling you against my better judgment. I ran the initial search on Maritime Holdings like you asked, and within 5 minutes of accessing the corporate records, I received a phone call. Someone knew I was looking. They knew immediately. She paused, her breath shaky. They told me that if I valued my family's safety, I would stop digging and I would advise you to do the same. I've worked for you for 8 years, Mr. Cross, and I've never been scared of anyone. But whoever these people are, they have access to real-time monitoring of corporate databases. That level of reach requires either government connections or something worse. Did they threaten you specifically? Donovan asked, his voice tight with controlled rage. They knew my daughter's name, Catherine said, and Maya could hear the tears in her voice. They knew where she goes to school. I'm sorry, Mr. Cross, but I have to think of my family. I can't help you with this. I understand, Donovan said, his voice gentler. You did the right thing by calling. Take your family somewhere safe for a few days. Take a vacation. Use my house in the Hampton one. I'll make sure you're protected. Thank you, Catherine said, relief evident in her voice. Please be careful. Whatever you're looking into, it's bigger and more dangerous than anything I've ever seen. After the call ended, Donovan and Maya sat in silence, the weight of escalating danger pressing down on them. Within hours of beginning their investigation, they'd received 2 direct threats. And now someone Donovan trusted had been scared off. Whoever was behind this had power, reach, and the willingness to threaten innocent people. They're not just watching us, Maya said quietly. They're watching everyone we talk to, everyone who might help us. They're trying to isolate us to make sure we're alone before they make their move. Then we don't give them time to make that move, Donovan said, standing up with sudden decision. We go to Red Hook tonight. We document whatever we find, and we expose it publicly before they can silence us. Once the truth is out there, killing us becomes pointless. And if we find nothing? Maya asked. If the building is empty, then we know they're protecting something that's already gone, which means there's another trail to follow. Donovan replied, but I don't think we'll find nothing. I think my father died because he stole that blueprint, because he saw something at that building that he wasn't supposed to see, and I think whatever it was, it's still there, waiting for someone brave enough or stupid enough to uncover it. Night came to the city like a held breath, the temperature dropping sharply as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. Maya stood in Donovan's penthouse watching the lights flicker on across the urban landscape. Each window a story she would never know, each life unfolding in comfortable ignorance of conspiracies and murder. She envied them their ordinary problems, their simple fears. Donovan emerged from his bedroom dressed in black tactical clothing that looked like it belonged in a military operation, rather than a civilian investigation. He carried a duffel bag which he set on the marble counter with a heavy thunk. Inside, Maya could see equipment that made her pulse quicken. Flashlights, a crowbar, bolt cutters, and what looked disturbingly like a handgun. Is that legal? She asked, pointing at the weapon. I have a permit, Donovan replied. And given that we're walking into a situation where multiple people have been murdered to protect secrets, I'd rather be overprepared than dead. He pulled out a smaller bag and handed it to her. Here, change into these. Maya opened the bag to find similar black clothing in her size. How did you know my size? I'm a billionaire with access to surveillance footage from the restaurant, Donovan said with a slight smile. I know more about you than you'd be comfortable with, but for the record, I'm not a creep. I'm just thorough. That's exactly what a creep would say, Maya replied, but she took the bag into the guest bathroom to change. When she emerged, she felt like she was wearing a costume for a role she wasn't qualified to play. The tactical pants had multiple pockets, the black turtleneck was form-fitting but allowed freedom of movement, and the boots were sturdy enough to kick down a door if necessary. You look like you're ready for a heist, Donovan observed. I feel like I'm ready to have a panic attack, Maya countered. I'm a waitress. I serve eggs and coffee. I don't break into abandoned warehouses looking for evidence of decades-old crimes. You're also the daughter of a woman who kept secrets for 26 years to protect you, Donovan said quietly. You have more strength in you than you realize. Your mother saw to that. The words settled something in Maya, a steadiness she hadn't known she needed. He was right. Elena had been small in stature but enormous in courage, had faced poverty and illness and fear with a dignity that never wavered. If she could do that, Maya could face whatever waited in Red Hook. They left through Donovan's private garage, climbing into a nondescript black SUV rather than his distinctive Mercedes as Donovan navigated through the city streets. Maya noticed him checking his mirrors constantly, taking random turns, doubling back on their route. He was checking for tails, she realized, making sure no one was following. The drive to Red Hook took 40 minutes through increasingly industrial neighborhoods. The gentrification that had transformed much of Brooklyn hadn't reached this far yet. Here, the streets were lined with warehouses and shipping facilities, chain-link fences, and graffitied walls. It was the kind of place where people minded their own business because not minding your business could get you hurt. Donovan pulled over 3 blocks from their destination and killed the engine. We walk from here, he said. If anyone is watching the building, I don't want them to see our vehicle. He pulled out 2 small devices that looked like earbuds. Put this in. Communication system. We stay in contact at all times. If anything feels wrong, if you see anything suspicious, you tell me immediately and we get out. Understood? Understood, Maya replied, fitting the earbud into her ear. She could hear Donovan's breathing, slightly elevated, matching her own nervous rhythm. They moved through the dark streets like shadows, staying close to buildings, avoiding the light from the few functioning street lamps. The waterfront smell grew stronger as they approached their destination, salt and rot and industrial chemicals creating a miasma that caught in Maya's throat. The building that housed Project Blackstone was exactly as the permits had described. A 3-story brick warehouse with boarded windows and a rusted chain across the loading dock doors. But knowing what lay beneath made it sinister. Pregnant with secrets that had killed to remain hidden. Donovan approached the chain and examined it closely. This lock is new, he whispered into his communication device, though they were standing right next to each other. Someone is maintaining security on an abandoned building. That means someone still cares what's inside. He pulled out the bolt cutters and made quick work of the chain, the sound of metal parting like a gunshot in the quiet night. They both froze, listening for any reaction, any sound of approaching footsteps or vehicles. Nothing, just the distant sound of traffic and the lap of water against the dock. The loading dock doors opened with a scream of protesting metal. Inside was darkness so complete it seemed solid, a wall of black that swallowed their flashlight beams. The air that rolled out was stale and cold, carrying an undertaste of something chemical and wrong. They stepped inside and Maya felt the weight of the building settle around her like a tomb. The first floor was empty, just a vast concrete space marked with the ghosts of machinery that had once filled it. Boxes were stacked along the walls, their contents long since rotted or stolen. Pigeon droppings covered every surface, and small animal sounds skittered in the darkness beyond their their lights. "The entrance to the sublevels should be somewhere in the center of the building," Donovan said, consulting the blueprint he had saved on his phone. "According to this, there's a freight elevator shaft. They found it behind a false wall that had been constructed to look like part of the building's support structure. The elevator itself was long gone, just a yawning shaft descending into blackness. Metal rungs set into the concrete wall provided the only way down. Ladies first," Donovan offered with dark humor. "Chivalry is dead," Maya replied, but she swung herself onto the ladder and began to descend. The rungs were cold and slightly damp, and she tried not to think about what would happen if one of them broke loose. The descent seemed to take forever, her arms burning with effort, her flashlight clenched between her teeth, making her jaw ache. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she was shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Donovan dropped down beside her a moment later, and together they surveyed the first sublevel. It was different from the warehouse above. This space was finished with concrete floors painted a industrial gray, fluorescent lights hanging dark and dead from the ceiling, and doors lining both sides of a central corridor. It looked like an office complex, sterile and corporate, completely at odds with the abandoned warehouse above. Donovan tried the first door and found it locked. The second door was also locked. The third door opened with a push, revealing what had once been some kind of laboratory. Stainless steel tables filled the room, their surfaces stained with substances Maya didn't want to identify. Broken glass littered the floor, and equipment that might have been microscopes or analyzers sat gathering dust. "What kind of warehouse needs a laboratory?" Maya whispered, her voice sounding too loud in the dead space. "The kind that wasn't really a warehouse," Donovan replied. He moved to a filing cabinet against the wall and pulled at the drawers. They were locked, but the bolt cutters made quick work of the mechanism. Inside were files. Dozens of them, their labels faded but still legible. Donovan pulled one out at random and opened it. Inside were medical records, or something that looked like medical records. Names, dates, treatments, and results documented in clinical language. But as Maya read over his shoulder, her blood ran cold. The treatments described weren't medical. They were experiments, testing reactions to various chemical compounds, measuring tolerance to environmental stressors, documenting psychological responses to sustained isolation. "These are human test subjects," Maya breathed. This place was running experiments on people. Donovan flipped through more files, his face going progressively paler in the flashlight beam. "These dates range from 1997 to early 1998. That's when my father was working construction for my grandfather's company." He pulled out another file, and this one made him stop breathing entirely. The name on the tab was Thomas Cross. Inside was a handwritten report dated August 1998, just weeks before Thomas disappeared. The writer, someone identified only as Dr. M. Harrison, described how Subject TC, a construction worker with access to the building, had become aware of the true nature of the facility. Subject TC had confronted project leadership and threatened to expose operations unless compensated. Initial payment of $500,000 was made to ensure silence. However, Subject TC proved unreliable, showing signs of moral conflict and possible intention to alert authorities despite monetary incentive. Recommend permanent solution to security breach. Authorization pending from project overseer. Permanent solution. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, which is exactly what they had been. Thomas Cross had discovered what was happening in the sublevels of Project Blackstone. He had tried to use that knowledge to get money for his secret family. And when he became a liability, they had killed him. "We need to take these files," Donovan said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We need to get them out of here into the authorities." "What authorities?" Maya asked. Catherine said, "Whoever is behind this has government connections. Who do we trust with this?" "The press," Donovan replied. "We make copies and send them to every major news organization simultaneously. We flood the zone with information so overwhelming it can't be suppressed." They began stuffing files into the duffel bag, working quickly, their flashlights making frantic arcs across the room. Maya felt the urgency like a physical pressure, the sense that they were running out of time before something terrible happened. That's when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of the loading dock doors opening far above them, followed by voices and footsteps. Multiple people moving with purpose heading toward the elevator shaft. Donovan grabbed Maya's arm, his eyes wide. "We need to find another way out. Now." They ran down the corridor, trying doors frantically. Most were locked, but one near the end opened into a stairwell that descended further into the earth. Without discussion, they plunged downward, taking the stairs two at a time, the duffel bag banging against Donovan's side. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, echoing down through the building's concrete bones. Flashlight beams began to probe the darkness above them, and voices called out commands in tones that were professional, military, terrifying in their calm efficiency. They reached the bottom level, sublevel 5, and found themselves in a space that made the laboratory above look innocent by comparison. This level was massive, A single open room filled with what looked like holding cells, each one a small concrete cube with a metal door and a sliding observation panel. The holding cells stretched into darkness like a nightmare given architectural form. Maya counted at least 20 of them, each one identical, each one bearing silent witness to horrors she could only imagine. The doors were scratched on the inside, deep gouges in the metal where desperate fingers had clawed for freedom that never came. On some of the walls, visible through the observation slots, were crude tally marks, prisoners counting days that blurred into months, into years, into madness. How many people? Maya whispered, her voice breaking. How many people suffered down here? Too many, Donovan replied, his flashlight beam trembling as he swept it across the cells. His face was ashen, his jaw clenched so tight Maya could hear his teeth grinding. My grandfather built this. His company, his money, his connections. He built a prison for human experimentation, and my father died for trying to expose it. The voices from above were getting closer, descending through the stairwell with methodical precision. Maya could hear the crackle of radios, the clipped professional exchanges of a trained security team. These weren't random thugs. These were professionals, possibly former military, the kind of people who knew how to hunt and how to kill. There has to be another exit, Maya said, forcing her mind to function through the fear. These cells have ventilation. There must be a mechanical system, ductwork, something that connects to the surface. Donovan was already moving, running his hands along the walls, looking for seams, access panels, anything that might lead to escape. At the far end of the cell block, behind what looked like a utility closet, he found it. A metal door marked maintenance only, secured with a heavy padlock. The bolt cutters made quick work of it, the snap of metal echoing through the cavernous space. Behind the door was a narrow corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits, barely wide enough for a person to walk through. The air here was different, moving, pulled by some distant ventilation system toward the surface world they desperately needed to reach. Go, Donovan urged, pushing Maya ahead of him. Follow the airflow. It has to lead outside eventually. Maya squeezed into the maintenance corridor, her shoulders brushing against pipes that were cold and slick with condensation. Behind her, she could hear Donovan's labored breathing, the scrape of the duffel bag against concrete, and far behind that, the sound of their pursuers discovering the maintenance door. There in the corridor, a voice called out, distorted by radio static but clearly audible in the confined space. Cut them off at the north exit. Do not let them leave this facility with those files. The corridor branched, offering choices that Maya had no basis for making. She chose left because the air seemed to move more strongly in that direction, praying it wasn't leading them into a dead end or a trap. The ceiling was getting lower, forcing them to crouch, then to crawl on hands and knees through spaces that felt like they were actively trying to crush them. Maya's flashlight illuminated something ahead, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading upward. She didn't hesitate, grabbing the rungs and climbing with desperate speed. Her muscles screamed in protest, her hands were raw and bleeding from the rough metal, but she kept climbing because the alternative was capture. And capture by people who had run an illegal human experimentation facility for decades meant something far worse than death. She burst through a grate at the top of the shaft and found herself in a different building, some kind of pump house or electrical station. The space was small, filled with humming machinery, but it had windows and a door to the outside world. Donovan emerged behind her, gasping, his face streaked with grime and sweat. They stumbled outside into the night air, and Maya had never been so grateful for the smell of salt water and garbage, for the distant sounds of traffic and humanity. They were at the waterfront, the black expanse of the river stretching before them, the lights of the city glittering on the opposite shore like a promise of safety they hadn't yet reached. "We need to move," Donovan panted, pulling her along the waterfront, away from the pump house, away from the facility that had already cost so many lives. His SUV was blocks away, but they couldn't risk going back for it. The security team would have found it by now, would be watching it, waiting for them to make that exact mistake. Maya's phone vibrated in her pocket, making her jump. She pulled it out and saw a text from a blocked number. The message was simple and chilling. "You have something that belongs to us. Return it, and you walk away. Keep running, and you won't survive the night." She showed the message to Donovan, whose expression hardened into something that looked almost feral. He pulled out his own phone and began typing rapidly. "What are you doing?" Maya asked. "Uploading," he replied. "I'm sending scans of these files to a cloud storage service, then sharing the links with 20 different journalists simultaneously. If they want to play hardball, so can we. The files go public in 2 hours unless I manually cancel the upload. Won't that put the journalists in danger?" Maya asked. "Maybe," Donovan said, his fingers never stopping their frantic movement. "But it also makes us less valuable as targets. Kill us now and the story still breaks. Let us live. Maybe they can negotiate. It's the only leverage we have." A black sedan pulled up alongside them and Maya's heart stopped. But instead of armed men piling out, the back window rolled down to reveal a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. She was wearing a tailored suit despite the late hour and had an air of command that made even Donovan straighten reflexively. "Get in," the woman said. Her voice was cultured, northeastern aristocratic. "Quickly, before someone less friendly finds you." "Who are you?" Donovan demanded, positioning himself between Maya and the car. "My name is Victoria Hammond," the woman replied. "I was the assistant director of the CIAS Office of Technical Services from 1994 to 2002. Project Blackstone was one of mine, though I shut it down in 1999 when I discovered what it had really become. I've been waiting 26 years for someone to finally expose it. Now get in the car before the people who want you dead realize I've found you first." Donovan and Maya exchanged a look. Getting into the car with a stranger was insane. Trusting someone who admitted running the very project they were trying to expose was suicidal. But standing on a dark waterfront street with armed pursuers closing in was also not a winning strategy. They got in the car. Victoria pressed a button and the sedan pulled away smoothly, driven by an unseen chauffeur hidden behind a privacy screen. The interior smelled of leather and expensive perfume, a surreal contrast to the claustrophobic horror of the underground facility they had just escaped. Project Blackstone was authorized in 1996. Victoria began without preamble. The premise was noble, or at least that's how it was sold. We would study the effects of various chemical and biological agents on willing volunteers, develop countermeasures for potential terrorist attacks, advance medical science. She lit a cigarette with a gold lighter, ignoring the no smoking sign on the door. What actually happened was that a group of contractors with more ambition than ethics began bringing in unwilling subjects, homeless people, undocumented immigrants, anyone who wouldn't be missed. "And you didn't know?" Donovan's voice was thick with skepticism. "I didn't know until it was too late," Victoria replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The facility was compartmentalized. I saw sanitized reports. By the time I learned the truth and tried to shut it down, powerful people had built fortunes on the research conducted there. Pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, politicians who had investments in both. They fought me every step of the way." "Thomas Cross," Maya said. "What happened to him?" Victoria took a long drag on her cigarette. "Thomas was a construction worker who did electrical work on the sublevels. He was curious, intelligent, and most dangerously, he had a conscience. He started asking questions, poking around where he shouldn't. When he found evidence of what was really happening, he tried to leverage it for money. Understandable given that he was drowning in debt and had a baby on the way." She paused, and something that might have been regret crossed her face. "But the people running Blackstone couldn't risk exposure. They paid him off initially, but when it became clear he might still talk, they made a decision. I tried to intervene when I learned what they were planning, but I was too late. By the time I got to New York, Thomas Cross was already in the river." "You knew he was murdered, and you did nothing?" Donovan's voice was dangerously quiet. "I did everything I could within a corrupt system," Victoria shot back. "I shut down the facility. I buried the program so deep that it would take a congressional investigation to unearth it. I forced 3 senior officials into early retirement. But I couldn't bring anyone to justice because doing so would have exposed the entire intelligence community to scrutiny we couldn't survive. So I made a choice, the same choice thousands of people in my position have made throughout history. I chose the perceived stability of the system over justice for individual victims." "That's a coward's rationalization," Maya said, surprised by her own boldness. "You're absolutely right," Victoria agreed. "It is. And I've lived with that cowardice for 26 years, watching careers flourish for people who should have been in prison. Watching the families of victims suffer while I did nothing." She looked directly at Maya. "But your mother made a different choice. Elena Sinclair refused the additional money I tried to give her as compensation. She refused the new identity I offered her. And she told me she would keep Thomas's secrets because exposing them would put her daughter in danger. But that one day, when the time was right, the truth would come out. She bet on you, Maya. She bet that you would be strong enough and brave enough to finish what your father started." The revelation was staggering. Maya's mother had known about Project Blackstone. She had met Victoria Hammond. She had chosen silence not out of fear or complicity, but as a calculated strategy to protect her daughter until Maya was old enough to fight back. "Why are you helping us now?" Donovan asked. "After 26 years of silence, why step forward?" "Because the people who ran Blackstone are planning something worse," Victoria said grimly. "I've been monitoring them for decades through back channels and old intelligence contacts. They're about to launch a new facility, this one with full government authorization under the guise of pandemic preparedness. They learned from Blackstone's mistakes. This time, everything will be legal, sanitized, impossible to prosecute." The sedan glided through the dark streets with the smooth inevitability of fate, carrying them away from the waterfront and toward an unknown destination. Maya's mind was reeling from Victoria Hammond's revelations. From the knowledge that her mother had known everything, had carried that terrible burden alone, had made the impossible choice to protect her daughter over seeking justice for the man she loved. "Where are you taking us?" Donovan asked, his hand resting on the door handle as if calculating whether jumping from a moving vehicle was preferable to trusting their mysterious benefactor. "Somewhere safe," Victoria replied. "Somewhere the people hunting you won't think to look." She tapped ash from her cigarette into a crystal ashtray built into the armrest. "You've triggered a hornet's nest tonight. The files you took contain names, dates, details that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the country. They won't stop until they recover those documents or ensure you can't reveal their contents." Donovan held up his phone. "Too late. I've already uploaded scans to the cloud. In less than 2 hours, those files go to every major news organization in the country unless I manually cancel the upload. Killing us just guarantees the story breaks." Victoria's expression shifted to something between admiration and concern. "That was clever, and incredibly reckless. You've just put a countdown on your own lives. Now they can't afford to negotiate. They have to find you and force you to cancel that upload before the deadline expires. So we go to the police, Maya said. We tell them everything. Get protective custody. The police can't protect you from people who have security clearances and access to surveillance systems, Victoria said flatly. The moment you walk into a police station, someone will make a phone call and officers will arrive with legitimate-looking orders to transfer you to federal custody. You'll disappear into the system and no one will ever see you again. Then what do? Maya demanded, frustration and fear making her voice sharp. We can't run forever. We can't hide. Apparently we can't trust anyone in authority. So what's left? We go public, Victoria said. But we do it right. We hold a press conference at a location too visible to attack, surrounded by witnesses, with the evidence already distributed to journalists who are prepared to publish regardless of what happens to us. We remove our value as targets by making our deaths counterproductive. A press conference, Donovan repeated skeptically. You expect people to believe a disgraced billionaire and an unemployed waitress over the denials of government officials and corporate executives? I expect them to believe documentary evidence, Victoria correct. I expect them to believe medical files with names and photographs, financial records showing money transfers, architectural blueprints that prove the facility's true purpose. The beauty of a conspiracy this vast is that it requires too many participants to keep perfectly secret. There are whistleblowers, dissidents, people with guilty consciences waiting for permission forward. Your press conference gives them that permission. The car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a building Maya didn't recognize. Victoria led them to a private elevator that required both a key and a biometric scan. The elevator rose swiftly and silently, depositing them in a penthouse apartment that made even Donovan's luxurious home look modest by comparison. This is my personal residence, Victoria explained, gesturing them inside. It's not listed in any public database. The building's security is staffed by people who owe their loyalty to me personally, not to any government or corporation. You're as safe here as you can be anywhere in this city. The apartment was decorated with the tasteful restraint of old money. All antique furniture and original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city lights. Maya felt profoundly out of place in her tactical gear and dirt-streaked face, a working-class girl playing dress-up in someone else's life. You have 2 hours to prepare your statement, Victoria said, checking an elegant gold watch. I've already contacted several journalists I trust, people who have been investigating government overreach for years. They'll be ready to publish the moment you go public. She opened a laptop and turned it to face them. Start writing. Tell your story, both of you, from the beginning. Make it personal, make it human. People need to understand what was lost, not just what was done. Maya sat down at the laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. Where did she even begin? With the ring her mother had treasured? With the encounter at the restaurant that had set everything in motion? With the moment she realized her entire life had been shaped by secrets and lies? Donovan stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Start with the rings, he said quietly. Start with the symbol of a promise broken, and a love that transcended everything they tried to do to destroy it. So Maya began to type, and as the words flowed, she felt something unlock inside her. This wasn't just about exposing a conspiracy. This was about reclaiming her father's memory, about honoring her mother's courage, about refusing to let powerful people write the only version of history that would be remembered. She wrote about Elena Sinclair, a seamstress who had loved a man who tried to do the right thing. She wrote about Thomas Cross, a construction worker who had seen evil and chosen conscience over survival. She wrote about families destroyed, lives stolen, justice deferred but never abandoned. Donovan added his own section, writing about growing up believing his father was a coward and a thief, about building an empire to prove he was nothing like the man who had abandoned him, only to discover that his father had been a hero whose sacrifice had been erased by people who couldn't afford the truth. He wrote about his grandfather, a man he had never questioned, whose legacy was built on atrocities that demanded accounting. As they worked, Victoria made phone calls in another room, her voice low and urgent. Maya caught fragments of conversations, journalists being briefed, security arrangements being confirmed, legal strategies being discussed. This woman who had chosen silence for 26 years was now orchestrating their protection with the same ruthless efficiency she had once used to bury secrets. When the statement was finished, polished and devastating in its simplicity, they had 30 minutes left before Donovan's upload would trigger. Victoria returned with printed copies and a grim expression. We have a problem, she said. Someone has traced Donovan's upload. They're launching a denial of service attack on every major news website in the country, trying to prevent publication. She looked at Donovan. They're also trying to hack your cloud storage to delete the files before they can be distributed. Can they succeed? Maya asked, her heart sinking. Not if we're fast enough, Victoria replied. She opened her own laptop and began typing commands that flew across the screen too quickly for Maya to follow. I'm creating multiple redundant uploads to international servers, routing them through networks in countries that don't cooperate with US intelligence requests. They can shut down American websites, but they can't shut down the entire internet. How much time do we have? Donovan asked. Minutes, Victoria said tersely. They're moving faster than I expected. Someone very high up has authorized the use of resources that are supposed to be reserved for national security emergencies. She looked up at them, And Maya saw fear in her eyes for the first time. They're not just trying to suppress this story. They're treating you as a threat to national security, which means they've authorized lethal force. The implications were staggering. Maya had gone from serving eggs to being hunted by her own government in less than 48 hours. She thought about her mother, about Elena's warning, about doors that should stay closed and truths that were too dangerous to speak. But Elena had also bet on her daughter's courage, had preserved the ring and the letters, knowing that one day Maya would be strong enough to carry the burden of truth. The upload is triggering, Donovan said, watching his phone. Files are distributing now to all 20 journalists plus Victoria's international servers. They can try to delete them, but they'd have to succeed everywhere simultaneously. Victoria's laptop emitted a sharp beep. We have publication, she said, relief evident in her voice. The Guardian just posted the first story online. The files are in the wild. She turned the screen to show them the headline. Secret CIA program conducted illegal human experiments for decades, files reveal. Within seconds, notifications began flooding in. Other publications were picking up the story, each adding their own analysis, their own outrage. Social media exploded with the revelations, the hashtag Blackstone files trending worldwide within minutes. The genie was out of the bottle and no amount of denial or suppression could put it back. Victoria's phone rang and her expression hardened as she answered. Yes, I'm watching the coverage. No, I will not reveal their location because I'm no longer employed by the agency and I don't answer to you anymore. She listened for a moment, then said coldly, tell the director that Victoria Hammond says he can go to hell and she'll see him at the congressional hearing. She hung up and looked at Maya and Donovan. That was the current assistant director of the CIA. He's not happy with me. Will they come after us now? Maya asked. Even though the story is public, they'll want you to testify, Victoria said. Congress will launch investigations, probably multiple agencies. You're witnesses now, which gives you some protection, but it also makes you permanent targets. There are people who would rather risk the exposure of killing you than let you provide testimony that could send them to prison. So we're not safe, Donovan said flatly. We'll never be safe. Not entirely, Victoria admitted, but you're safer than you were an hour ago. And more importantly, you've accomplished something remarkable. You've exposed a conspiracy that powerful people spent decades and countless millions trying to hide. You've given voice to victims who died thinking they would never receive justice. That's worth the risk you're taking. Maya walked to the windows and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there in apartments and houses across America, people were reading about Project Blackstone. We're learning about Thomas Cross and Elena Sinclair. We're discovering that their government had authorized atrocities in the name of security. Some would deny it, would call it fake news or conspiracy theory, but others would believe, would demand accountability, would refuse to let the story fade into forgotten history. The congressional hearing room was designed to intimidate with its soaring ceilings, dark wood paneling, an elevated bench where representatives sat in judgment like modern-day gods. Maya had seen rooms like this on television, had watched other witnesses squirm under hostile questioning, but nothing had prepared her for the weight of actually sitting in the witness chair with cameras broadcasting her face to millions of viewers. It had been 3 weeks since the Blackstone files went public. 3 weeks of media firestorm, of emergency congressional sessions, of resignations and arrests that rippled through the intelligence community like a cleansing fire. The story had grown beyond anything Maya and Donovan could have imagined, expanding to include revelations about other secret program, other victim, other conspiracies that had piggybacked on Blackstone's infrastructure. Donovan sat beside her at the witness table wearing a dark suit that made him look every inch the billionaire titan, though Maya knew he had barely slept since they had gone public. His company's stock had plummeted when investors learned his grandfather had founded the construction firm that built Blackstone's underground chambers. Donovan had spent the past weeks meeting with lawyers, liquidating assets and preparing to pay restitution to victims' families from his personal fortune. The committee chairman, a silver-haired senator from Massachusetts named Edward Brennan, gavelled the hearing to order. His expression was one of carefully calibrated outrage, the kind that played well on television but revealed nothing about his actual feelings. Miss Sinclair, Mr. Cross, thank you for agreeing to testify today. I know this has been an extraordinarily difficult time for both of you. Thank you, Senator, Maya replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Her mother's ring hung beneath her blouse on its chain, a talisman giving her strength. Beside it, on an identical chain that Donovan had given her, hung Thomas Cross's ring. The two symbols reunited at last, guardian and builder, conscience and ambition. Miss Sinclair, let's begin with how you first learned about Project Blackstone, Senator Brennan said, launching into questions they had rehearsed with Victoria Hammond's legal team. Maya told her story, beginning with the encounter at the restaurant, the discovery of the matching rings, the letters her mother had preserved. She spoke about Elena Sinclair's courage in keeping secrets that could have gotten them both killed, about a seamstress who had loved a man brave enough to stand against evil even when it cost him everything. When it was Donovan's turn, he spoke about growing up hating a father he had never understood, about building an empire to prove he was nothing like the man who had abandoned him. His voice cracked when he described learning the truth, discovering that Thomas Cross hadn't been a coward but a hero, that his death had been murder disguised as accident, that justice had been deferred for 26 years because people in power power valued stability over accountability. The questions went on for hours, some hostile, some sympathetic, all designed to extract maximum detail for the public record. Maya's legs went numb from sitting. Her throat grew hoarse from speaking, but she never wavered. Every time she felt her courage faltering, she would touch the rings through her blouse and remember why she was there. During a recess, Victoria Hammond approached them in the hallway outside the hearing room. She looked drawn, older than her years, the weight of her own testimony earlier in the day clearly taking its toll. "You're doing well," she said quietly. "The committee is getting what it needs. There will be criminal prosecutions, policy reforms, compensation for families. Will it be enough?" Maya asked. "Can we ever really make this right?" "No," Victoria said with brutal honesty. "We can't bring back the dead or give those years back to the people who suffered, but we can ensure it doesn't happen again. We can build systems that prevent this kind of abuse. That's the best we can do, and it's what Thomas and Elena would have wanted." A commotion at the end of the hallway drew their attention. An older man in an expensive suit was being escorted by federal marshals, his hands cuffed behind his back. He had the bearing of someone accustomed to power, though now that power had abandoned him. His eyes swept the hallway and locked on Donovan with an intensity that was almost physical. "Richard Ashford," Victoria said quietly, "the attorney who called to threaten. He was the legal architect of Blackstone, the one who structured the shell companies and drafted the immunity agreements. He's been arrested on multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder." Ashford stopped walking, forcing the marshals to halt with him. "Mr. Cross," he called out, his voice still carrying the smooth, urbane tone that had once intimidated corporate boardrooms. "You've destroyed lives to chase your father's ghost. Executives, scientists, public servants who believed they were protecting national security. You've weakened American intelligence capabilities and emboldened our enemies. I hope you can live with that legacy." Donovan stepped forward and Maya saw in his face a cold fury that had been building for weeks. "My father tried to expose illegal human experimentation and you had him murdered. You threatened my girlfriend with violence if we continued investigating. You've spent decades covering up crimes against humanity, and now you have the audacity to lecture me about legacy." The word girlfriend sent a small shock through Maya. They hadn't discussed their relationship, hadn't labeled what had grown between them through shared danger and mutual purpose. But hearing Donovan claim her publicly in front of cameras and witnesses filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the hearing or the conspiracy. "Your father was a thief and a blackmailer," Ashford replied coldly. "He stole money and tried to leverage classified information for personal gain. We offered him a peaceful resolution and he chose to escalate. His death was regrettable but necessary to protect vital national security program." "Necessary," Donovan repeated, his voice rising. "You murdered my father, destroyed my family, and ruined my childhood because he discovered you were torturing innocent people in the name of science. You don't get to call that necessary. You don't get to wrap your crimes in patriotism and expect absolution." The marshals pulled Ashford away, but his voice carried back down the hallway. "You'll understand one day, Cross, when the next attack comes. When American lives are lost because we didn't have the intelligence we needed, you'll understand the price of your righteousness." The confrontation left Maya shaking. She had seen the face of the conspiracy, the human being who had signed orders and made phone calls and set in motion the events that had killed her father. Richard Ashford wasn't a monster from a nightmare. He was an ordinary man who had convinced himself that atrocity was acceptable when dressed in the language of necessity and security. The afternoon session brought more testimony, this time from survivors of Blackstone's experiments, men and women who had been homeless, undocumented, or otherwise vulnerable when they had been taken. They spoke of being held in the underground cells, of medical procedures performed without consent, of psychological torture disguised as research. Their testimony was devastating, transforming abstract concepts of human rights violations into individual stories of suffering that no one could ignore. One witness, a woman named Sarah Chun, who had been held in Blackstone for 18 months in 1997, spoke directly to Maya during her testimony. "Your father tried to help me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was in one of those cells and he was doing electrical work in the corridor. He saw me through the observation slot and I begged him for help. He brought me food, smuggled in from outside. He promised me he was going to expose what was happening, that he was going to get me out. Then one day he just stopped coming and I thought he had abandoned me like everyone else had, but he didn't abandon me. They killed him for trying to save me." The words broke something open in Maya's chest. Her father hadn't just been fighting for his own family. He had been fighting for strangers, for people society had discarded, for victims who had no voice. His crime hadn't been theft or blackmail. His crime had been compassion in a system that required callousness to function. When the hearing finally adjourned for the day, Maya and Donovan emerged from the building to find a crowd waiting outside. Some were supporters holding signs thanking them for their courage. Others were protesters accusing them of treason and demanding they be prosecuted for exposing classified programs. The media was a feeding frenzy of cameras and shouted questions, creating a wall of noise and light that was overwhelming. Security personnel ushered them into a waiting car, and they sped away through streets that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. Maya's face was now recognized everywhere. She couldn't return to her old life, couldn't fade back into anonymity even if she wanted to. The revelation of Blackstone had made her a public figure, whether she had sought that role or not. Back in Victoria's penthouse, which had become their temporary refuge, Maya finally allowed herself to collapse onto the sofa. Donovan sat beside her, and for a long moment they simply existed in the quiet, letting the events of the day settle around them like dust after an explosion. "He called you his girlfriend," Maya said softly, not looking at him. "In the hallway when you confronted Ashford." Donovan was silent for a moment. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have presumed. It's been an intense few weeks, and I may have misread what's been developing between us." "You didn't misread," Maya said, finally meeting his eyes. "I don't know what we are exactly, or how a billionaire and a waitress are supposed to navigate a relationship built on shared trauma and mutual investigation into our father's murders, but I know that you've been the one person I could trust when everything else in my life was falling apart. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything," Donovan replied, taking her hand. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, his bearing somehow vulnerable despite his usual confidence. "I've spent my whole life building walls, accumulating money and power as armor against ever feeling helpless again. But you walked into my life and reminded me that real strength isn't about protection. It's about connection, about choosing to be vulnerable with someone even when it's terrifying." Maya leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the exhaustion of the past weeks finally catching up with her. "We testified today. We told the truth. The arrests are happening. The investigations are underway. Have we done enough? Can we finally stop running?" "We're not running anymore," Donovan said, his arm coming around her shoulders. "We're standing still, which is somehow even harder. We have to live with what we've uncovered, with the responsibilities that come with knowing what we know." 6 months after the hearing, Maya stood in front of a new building that bore her mother's name. The Elena Sinclair Center for Whistleblower Protection occupied a converted brownstone in downtown Brooklyn, funded entirely by Donovan Cross's personal fortune. The center provided legal support, security services, and financial assistance to people who risked everything to expose corruption. It was a living memorial to a seamstress who had kept dangerous secrets to protect her daughter, to a construction worker who had died trying to do the right thing. The congressional investigations had resulted in 17 indictments, including 3 former CIA directors, 7 pharmaceutical executives, and a dozen contractors who had profited from Blackstone's research. Richard Ashford had been sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The CIA's Office of Technical Services had been disbanded and restructured under independent oversight. Legislation had passed requiring external review of any classified program involving human subjects. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something. The victims of Project Blackstone, or at least those who could be identified and located, had received financial compensation and public apologies from the government. Sarah Chun, the woman who had testified about Thomas's kindness, now worked as an advocate for homeless rights, her voice amplified by the attention the case had brought. Others had chosen to fade back into private life, their trauma too deep for public exposure. Maya understood both choices. Survival took many forms. Donovan emerged from the building carrying 2 cups of coffee, a smile touching his face when he saw her standing on the sidewalk. "Still admiring our work?" "Our work," Maya repeated, liking the sound of it. She took the coffee gratefully, savoring the warmth against the autumn chill that reminded her so much of that night 6 months ago when her life had changed forever. "I was just thinking about how strange it is that something so terrible led to something good. That's the paradox of justice," Donovan said, standing beside her. "It can't undo harm, but it can sometimes transform it into purpose." He looked up at the building, at the bronze plaque bearing Elena's name. "Your mother would be proud of you." Maya touched the rings hanging beneath her sweater. Both of them now, guardian and builder united. "I think she knew this would happen. I think she preserved everything, kept all those letters and documents, because she believed that one day I would be strong enough to carry the truth forward." "You were always strong enough," Donovan said. "You just needed a reason to discover it." He turned to face her fully, his expression becoming serious. "I've been thinking about something and I need your input before I make a decision." "That sounds ominous," Maya said with a slight smile. "I'm considering stepping down as CEO of Cross Holdings," Donovan said. "The company will always be tainted by its connection to Blackstone, and I'm tired of spending my energy defending a legacy that was built on lies. I want to do something that matters, something that makes the world better rather than just making me richer." "What would you do instead?" Maya asked, her heart beating faster because she sensed this was a pivotal moment, a turning point that would shape both their futures. "I want to work here," Donovan said, gesturing at the center. "Full-time, not just as a donor. I want to use the skills I developed building an empire to instead build systems that protect people from the kind of abuse we uncovered. I want to spend my life making sure Thomas Cross and Elena Sinclair's sacrifice wasn't in vain." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his face. "But that's a dramatic change, and it would affect you too, since we're, well, whatever we are, partners," Maya said firmly. "We're partners in this center, in exposing the truth, figuring out how to build something meaningful from tragedy, and I think stepping down is exactly the right decision. Relief flooded Donovan's features. I was afraid you'd think I was being impulsive or running away from responsibility. You're running toward responsibility, Maya corrected. The responsibility to honor the dead by serving the living. That's the opposite of running away. They were interrupted by Victoria Hammond, who emerged from a taxi with the brisk efficiency that characterized all her movements. She was dressed impeccably as always, though retirement from government service had softened something in her bearing. She no longer carried herself like a woman with terrible secrets. She carried herself like someone who had been pardoned, if not quite absolved. The forensic team just finished their analysis of the Blackstone facility, Victoria said without preamble. They've identified the remains of 47 individuals from the sublevel cells, people who died during the experiments and were buried on site. She handed Maya a folder. Your father's DNA was not among them. Thomas Cross died in the river, exactly where they said he did, which means he never returned to the facility after he was paid off. He kept his word about staying away, even though it cost him his life. Maya opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were autopsy reports confirming that Thomas had drowned, but also revealing something more. He had defensive wounds on his hands and arms, evidence that he had fought his attackers. The official narrative had been that he jumped or fell from a pier, possibly suicide. The evidence told a different story. Thomas Cross had been murdered, thrown into the river after a struggle, his death staged to look like an accident or the desperate act of a guilt. They killed him anyway, Maya said, her voice thick with emotion. Even after he took the money and promised to stay quiet, they killed him because they couldn't risk him changing his mind. Guilty conscience is a powerful motivator, Victoria said quietly. They couldn't control Thomas's future behavior, so they eliminated the variable. It's the coldest calculation in intelligence work, removing human unpredictability from the equation. Did he know? Maya asked. When he wrote that last letter to my mother, did he know they were coming for him? I think he suspected, Victoria said. The letter mentions arrangements being made, money being hidden, the ring being left as proof. Those are the actions of a man preparing for the worst. She looked at Maya with something that might have been admiration. He died protecting you and your mother. He drew their attention to himself and away from Elena. That was his final gift. The three of them stood in silence, honoring a man who had been vilified and forgotten, whose truth had taken 26 years to emerge. Then Victoria cleared her throat and produced a small box from her bag. I have something for you both. Inside were 2 medals, civilian honors recently authorized by Congress for individuals who expose government wrongdoing at great personal risk. Congratulations, you're officially heroes, though I suspect that designation feels somewhat hollow. It does, Maya admitted, taking the medal but feeling no triumph, only the heavy satisfaction of a job completed. But I'll accept it on behalf of everyone who couldn't be here to receive recognition. The 47 people whose remains were found, the survivors who are still too traumatized to come forward. My mother and Donovan's father, who paid the ultimate price for trying to do the right thing. Speaking of recognition, Victoria said, there's one more thing. The city is dedicating a memorial park next month at the Blackstone site. The building is being demolished, and in its place will be a green space with a monument listing the names of all identified victims. They want you both to speak at the dedication ceremony. We'll be there, Donovan said, his hand finding Maya's and squeezing gently. After Victoria left, Maya and Donovan walked through the Brooklyn streets toward the waterfront, retracing in reverse the desperate flight they had made 6 months earlier. So much had changed. They had changed, transformed by truth and testimony from ordinary people into reluctant symbols of resistance against institutional corruption. Do you ever regret it? Maya asked as they stood at the water's edge, watching the river flow past with its cargo of secrets and stories. Do you wish you had never confronted me that night at the restaurant, never learned what your grandfather built, never discovered the truth about your father? Every day, Donovan admitted, and not at all. I regret the pain, the fear, the innocence lost. I regret that we live in a world where people like your mother have to keep terrible secrets to protect their children, but I don't regret knowing the truth. I don't regret meeting you. I don't regret becoming someone who fights for justice instead of just accumulating wealth. My father gave me that gift even though I didn't recognize it for 26 years. Maya reached beneath her sweater and pulled out the 2 rings on their chain. She held them up, letting the dying sunlight catch the gold and make the hawk's diamond eyes sparkle like captured stars. In the beginning, these were symbols of a promise broken, of brothers or fathers separated by greed and ambition. Now they represent something else. Enduring power of truth over lies, the connection between 2 families who should have been enemies but became allies instead. She removed both chains and handed one to Donovan. I think it's time these rings went home, not to a jewelry box or a safe deposit box, but to a place where they can mean something. The memorial, Donovan said, understanding immediately. We display them at the Blackstone Memorial. Let them be a reminder that even small acts of courage, like a construction worker refusing to stay silent or a seamstress preserving evidence for her daughter, can eventually topple empires built on corruption. They stood together as the sun set over the water. 2 people whose lives had been shaped by events that occurred before they were born, by parents who had loved and sacrificed and died for principles that powerful people tried to erase. Maya thought about the waitress she had been 6 months ago, serving coffee to strangers, drowning in medical debt, invisible to a world that never looked at people like her. She thought about the woman she had become, someone who had stared down conspiracies and testified before Congress, whose voice had helped bring justice to the voiceless. The story of Project Blackstone would be told and retold, would become a case study in government overreach and the importance of whistleblower protections. But for Maya, it would always be personal. It would always be about a mother who had worked her fingers raw at a sewing machine, who had kept terrible secrets to protect her daughter, who had bet everything on the belief that truth eventually finds its way into the light. It would always be about a father she never knew, who had seen suffering and chosen conscience over survival, who had died so that one day, 2 decades later, his daughter could expose the evil he had discovered. As darkness fell over the city, Maya and Donovan walked away from the waterfront hand in hand, two unlikely partners united by tragedy and transformed by truth. Behind them, the river continued its eternal flow, carrying away the past but never quite washing it clean. Ahead of them, the Alina Sinclair Center glowed with warm light, a beacon for others who would need courage to speak truth to power, who would need protection when they chose justice over silence. The rings would find their place at the memorial, symbols of a promise finally kept, and Maya and Donovan would continue the work their parents had begun, turning private grief into public good, transforming the legacy of corruption into a foundation for reform. It wasn't a happy ending, because there are no happy endings when justice comes too late to save the victims, but it was a righteous ending, and in a world that so often favored expedience over ethics, that would have to be enough. Sometimes a single sentence can unlock a door you never knew existed. For Maya Sinclair, that sentence had been a simple observation about a ring. It had led her through hell and back, had cost her everything she thought she knew about her family and herself, and had given her a purpose that transcended the small, safe life she had been living. She wouldn't wish the journey on anyone, but she also wouldn't trade it for anything, given her the truth. And the truth, however painful, was always worth the price of discovering.